All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to version 2. Version 2 today. All right. Thanks so much. And we have Matthias here, and you're all up, man. Get going.
Cool. All right. So yeah, as I was mentioning before, Mike has sort of been hounding me to come present here at the user group for the last 6 months. I think he was hoping that I was going to call in remotely from the Netherlands one late night and do something cool. Um, he mentioned it again a couple of months ago, and I realized that I was going to be in the States anyways. I was at another conference in Kentucky last week. And so I thought, when you look at a map, Kentucky, North Carolina seems sort of close, right? So why not just commit to this? So here I am. One of the reasons me and Mike have been talking is that we ran into each other a year and a half ago at the PowerShell Summit. We were standing at the bar. I was talking to Mike Robbins, and we were talking about sort of this idea of putting things out on the internet, right? Like blogging, Stack Overflow, and what we sort of from a selfish point of view got something out of it, right? Because we can't remember all the stuff that we do, right? If you think about your career, if you think about the last 10, 15, 20 years, right? There's no way you're going to remember all the technical things and all the things you learn and so on and so on. So putting things out on the internet is really nice for other people to get some value out of it. But from a more selfish point of view, it also means that we now have Google cataloging what we learned in the past, right? And so Mike came over just as we were having this conversation, and he was sort of talking, yeah, maybe I should stop blocking as well. Maybe I should, I don't know. And now a year and a half later, he's co-organizing this huge user group, and was speaking at the PowerShell Summit earlier this year. So I think that's super cool, and I sort of wanted to pay back a little bit after sort of pushing him in that direction.
Sure, man.
One of the things that we sort of both enjoy professionally is Active Directory, right? And before I got into information security, I used to be an Active Directory admin. So I used to be a domain admin for big companies, anything from 20,000 to 500,000 users. And that's also sort of what spawned my information security or my security career, is that a lot of people have Active Directory and need help securing it, right? So today, what we're going to do, very quickly, who am I? My name is Matthias. I work as a threat detection engineer at Booking.com. I'm sort of obsessed with PowerShell, which is also why I'm here today. And then I'm nostalgically and professionally invested in Active Directory. You could say emotionally invested in Active Directory, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Today, we're not going to be talking a lot about PowerShell. We're going to be talking about Active Directory. And sort of what I had in mind is that you probably don't know who this guy is. His name is Grundtvig. He's a Danish pastor from the mid 18th or 19th century, and he had this idea that as a society we move forward by keeping alive something he called the living word or oral tradition, right? And so for this reason, I thought I wanted to show up in person and then tell a story, because people relate to stories, right? So we're not going to do a bunch of demos. This is not going to be like a bullet point rundown. It's like, this is how you configure Active Directory or secure Active Directory. I'm just going to tell a story about sort of the worst disaster scenario I've ever run into with Active Directory, and maybe we'll learn something from that. Afterwards, once I'm done with that, since I'm here anyways, if you have any questions that you think I might be able to answer with Active Directory, PowerShell, whatever, we'll do like a short AMA. Sounds cool? All right.
Just so you know, there's like 7 people that have apologized that they could not stick around. Thomas Reyna, Adidas, Poor Bob, they're like, please tell him. I'm like, I think he'll find out.
Thanks. All right. So why Active Directory domain services? Well, Active Directory is cool, right? I don't know if you agree, but I think Active Directory is pretty darn cool, right? It's been around for a while. It's been around since the late 90s. So it has more than 20 years of sort of legacy and compatibility history. It's also sort of a cornerstone in many large enterprise and small enterprise networks, right? So a lot of people rely on Active Directory and its services, even people who are moving into the cloud. Many of them still have a dependency on Active Directory as sort of their primary identity management platform. It's also very complex and generally poorly understood, right? And I don't mean that like, people doing Active Directory are stupid, but there's so much complexity in Active Directory that it's sort of hard to be an expert or really well learned in all of it. So I want to talk about some of this complexity, right? Now, there's also another reason. I don't know if any of you have, small children or family members with toddlers, but have you ever observed a baby realizing the following: that they can control movement of their extremities, right? If you've seen like a small child figuring out that they have hands and that they can sort of control them, right? There's nothing like the joy of figuring out that I can do something with my mind and now my extremities sort of move, right? And then there's a step after that. Once a baby sort of realizes that they can use that agency to affect change in their environment, right? So a baby will figure out that they can do stuff in their brain, their arms and their extremities will run around, and at some point they'll start touching something, right? They'll touch a ball and it'll roll away. And this sensation that you have agency to affect change in your environment is sort of fundamental to human experience, right? And when we talk about IT in general, when we talk about IT security, there's a high incident rate, at least in the Western world, of sort of burnout, right? Like there's too much bullshit, for lack of a better word, in modern jobs. We all need to do administrative tasks. We have way too many meetings, right? And we never have the sense that we actually sort of affect real change and impact around us. And the people who are stuck with this the most, they end up in this situation of what we call burnout, right? Like you sort of collapse under not being able to sort of use your agency to affect real change or impact in your environment. And so for me, Active Directory, being able to better understand Active Directory and being able to use that understanding to solve problems and configure these environments and then see applications, networks, use cases out in the real world actually take advantage of this. This was sort of my first experience in doing IT management and IT administration, where I felt like, whoa, this is really cool, right? Like I can sit down, I can understand the complexity, I can make some changes, and all of a sudden I solve problems sort of at breadth, right? Because many applications are relying on Active Directory. So that's sort of my motivation and why I'm still nostalgically and emotionally invested in Active Directory. So a cornerstone of Active Directory is its replication feature, or the way data is replicated amongst databases in Active Directory. And sort of at a high level, Active Directory replication has some very interesting characteristics. The first one that comes to mind is that it performs something we call multi-master replication. And the reason I've added say what is that multi-master replication is pretty cool, right? And it's pretty complex, right? In most sort of classical database replication chains, you will have a master instance of a database, right? And then you will have a chain or a hierarchy of what we call slaves or replicators. So that means that any application that needs to update data in the database, they have a single entry point for writing or updating data, right? And then that sort of replicates or spills out in through the replication hierarchy. The reason for that is that this is the easiest way of ensuring consistency in the data set, right? You want to make sure that it's not immediately, then you can at least guarantee eventual consistency in the data that your clients or your applications can query. But if you have database instances like with Active Directory, where they might be geographically dispersed, right? Like there might be a domain controller in this office here in North Carolina. There might be one in Africa, one out in Southeast Asia. And we want to sort of attain eventual consistency between these systems. But latency, at least back in 1999, might have been a hindrance for attaining consistency within a time limit that would allow you to sort of take advantage of the updates to the data in your directory. And so the way Microsoft sort of solved this is by saying, okay, we think we've come up with a consistency model that will allow us to do multi-master replication. And what this means is that you can talk to any domain controller, right? If we forget about read-only domain controllers for a second, you can talk to any domain controller, make any change, and eventually that change to whatever piece of data in the store will replicate out to the others, even though other people might be making changes to another master replica somewhere else. So this is a super hard sort of distributed computing problem, and the solution that Microsoft came up with for Active Directory is, I'd say, pretty elegant. So data is replicated at the link level. Does anyone know the difference between attribute values and link value attributes in Active Directory? So so link value attributes in Active Directory are things like direct reports in manager or member and member of, right? So the member attribute is a multi-valued attribute on a group, for example, right? And any change to that will be reflected on the object that is referenced in said attribute, right? So the group has a list of members, and these members are all distinguished names of other objects, so other security principles in the domain. Could be your user account, right? And your user account's member of object, the linked attribute, will then reflect that relationship. And so the way you support doing this at scale, having multiple linked relationships back and forth, is by only replicating changes to the individual link relationship rather than the full list of members of a group. Because if you had to send the full list of members of a group every time an update was made to a group, and I add Mike to a group on the domain controller in Southeast Asia, and I add Phil to a group somewhere else, we might end up with sort of some of these logical consistency errors where, okay, the last update was Phil, should we then remove Mike again? So the way to solve this is to simply just replicate the single update to that linked multi-value attribute. This has been the case since 2003. Prior to that, like the entire member list would be replicated between domain controllers. In order to keep track of all of this, like having these like very granular, very narrow updates in multiple replicas of this multi-master replication setup, each domain controller or each DSA, the directory service agent, this process that runs and takes care of replication on the DC, they each maintain some metadata per link or per attribute that has been changed for every single object in the directory. And the metadata is, this is an oversimplification, but this is sort of what you need to know, is that the metadata itself consists of something called an update sequence number. The update sequence number is an auto-incrementing counter maintained on every single DC, right? So if you look at a single DC, a change is made and the update sequence number is incremented by 1. So you have sort of this forward counting, accounting of all the changes that have been made. For link values, the metadata will also contain the last addition of any unique relationship or the last deletion for any unique link value relationship. So if you go in and look at, if you use something like PowerShell's get80 replication attribute metadata, you can do this with RepAdmin as well. If you use this against an object on a specific domain controller, it's going to tell you, let's say that I add Mike to a group, and then I delete his membership from that group again. If you check the metadata, the group will now no longer have Mike's identity in the member list, right? But if you go in and check the metadata, it's actually going to reflect that the last change between Mike and this group was that his entry was deleted from the member from the member attribute. And so for someone like me who does digital forensics when we have incidents or someone's trying to hack us, this is super interesting, right? Because all of this metadata tells me something about when something happened that might no longer be reflected in the directory data itself. Obviously, this is not the main purpose. The main purpose is to...
Is that across all domains? You can see all that kind of stuff, or it has to be enabled?
No, that's not enabled. Like, again, this metadata exists so that the domain controllers can keep track of this multi-master replication setup, right? So the metadata is always there. And you don't need anything special to discover that. It's hidden by default, but like there's nothing stopping you from retrieving it. So if you have a look at something like get80 replication attribute metadata, it's going to ask you to specify an object, so that could be user account or group or something like that, and then a specific DC, because the metadata is unique per DC. Because we'll probably get to that in the next slide. All right. So as I said, all this multi-master consistency, it's sort of hard to keep track of, right? But in order to keep track of not colliding updates and so on, each domain controller or each DSA also maintains metadata. That's what we just talked about. Each domain controller also maintains two what I would call partner USN indices. So if you've ever troubleshooted like replication in Active Directory, you might have seen commands like RepAdmin /show UTD vec, right? This refers to something called the up-to-dateness vector. And the up-to-dateness vector table is this index of USNs per database in the entire forest, right? So if in a forest you have 10 different domain controllers, and they're all replicating, 5 database partitions, there's going to be 10 times 5 USN updates in each of the up-to-dateness vector tables on the domain controllers, right? And so this is a way for the individual domain controller to be able to track, have I seen any updates or any change from any specific domain controller, any specific database replica, right? The other index that it holds is the high watermark table. This is very similar, but it only contains the last maximum update sequence number for its direct replication partners, right? So if you've ever opened up Active Directory sites, right, you can configure the replication topology and say like, domain controllers in this site should only be talking to domain controllers down in this site here, right? In that case, the domain controllers in site A will have the high watermark table values for the domain controllers in site B, but not necessarily in like the next site in your replication topology because they never talk directly to each other, right? The high watermark table is only for their direct replication partners, and the reason to keep track of this is that you can sort of squeeze down the delta of updates that you need to track back and forth when you need to replicate changes that happened on your direct replication partner. Okay, so every time a domain controller replicates this delta of changes that it gets from another domain controller, each replication update or each packet of updates to be replicated is going to contain the update value, right? So if anything has been updated, what was added to this most value attribute, or what is the new name of this object? Per update value, it's also going to contain something called the invocation ID of the database replica in which the update originated, right? So the invocation ID is a way of uniquely identifying, let's say, the default naming context in a specific database replica on a domain controller, right? So if I have domain controller 1 and I go in there and I change the name, let's say the display name of a user object, for example, then the update that eventually ends up on, a domain controller 3 sites out is going to contain an invocation ID specific to the replica on DC1, and then obviously the information about the value change itself, and then the corresponding USN, the corresponding update sequence number on the DC holding that database replica. And so as soon as it processes the update, it uses that USN value to go back to its up-to-dateness vector table, which is just a mapping between this invocation ID that I identified in the database, and then it updates it with the last max USN. So the next time it talks to another replication partner that has also seen this update event from some DC that it doesn't talk directly to, it's going to be able to say, I've already seen this update, I'm not going to apply that again, right? So this is how Active Directory keeps track of consistency across complex replication topologies and webs of data and updates. And then finally, each replication update is also going to contain the new maximum USN for the replication source, right? So the direct replication partner that it's talking, the domain controller that asked it to pull these changes or that it requested changes from. And so again, it goes back and it updates its high watermark table. And so this way it knows, again, you sort of have a new offset for the delta of changes that you need to replicate the next time you talk to them. So, okay, it's maybe a little mind-wrenching if you haven't thought or looked into this before, but this is sort of cool, right? And this is the core of why Active Directory sort of just seems to work, right? Like we deploy it, we use it, we keep integrating applications, onboarding users, and whatever. Unless we do something stupid or something to like directly undermine this, sort of just works, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to mention here is that there's sort of two types. This is an oversimplification again, but there are sort of two types of normal replication, what we call intra-site replication, so domain controllers in the same site talking to each other. From 2008 or 2008 R2 and up, the default replication interval is 15 seconds plus 3. That is, there is a leader in each site that says, I'm going to wait 15 seconds before I notify the others that I might have a change that they need to replicate, and then it waits 3 seconds before contacting the next domain controller so that you don't sort of flood all of your neighbors at once. For inter-site replication, that is between sites, right? You have site A, you have site B, there's a site link between them, and you want to replicate something from one to the other. The minimum interval that you can configure, and I think this is default in 2008 or 2 and up as well, is 15 minutes, right? So if, again, this is sort of a vestige of, enterprise networks and metered connections from like the late 90s and the early 2000s, right? I think we're all in a position today, or most of us are in a position where most of our sites and most of our links are over IP connections that have plenty of bandwidth and that are not metered, and we don't need to worry about the cost, right? And so if you find yourself in a situation where you have, where you see the replication is slow, right? Like someone connects an application and it connects to one DC and they get a different result than the other. An easy way of sort of countering this is by enabling change notifications on all high-speed site links. When you enable this thing called change notifications, intra-site replication changes so that it starts acting like intra-site replication instead. So instead of every 15 minutes, one domain controller going to the next site and asking, do you have any changes? Can I replicate this? Basically, you have the domain controllers every time they update, go out to the next site over your site link and say, hey, I have some updates, please pull. And as soon as you enable change notifications, the same intra-site replication interval is going to apply. This can be changed in the registry of the DCs themselves. As soon as you enable change notifications on a site link. There's a link, and I'll share this slide deck later. I'm not going to go into detail about how to do this. But basically, you go in, you find the inside transport, right? This only works for IP connections, but I don't think anyone is using SMTP for replication.
So what happens if during a quiet period there is no change notifications that come through? Do they check in like the old style way?
No.
Every now and then?
So if there is no changes to any replicated data in the directory, nothing is going to happen, right? And so the next time a change occurs, it's going to check, is it more than the change interval since I contacted a replication partner? If it is, then it's just going to notify immediately. If it's 12 seconds ago and the interval is 15 seconds, it's going to wait 3 seconds and then it's going to send the notification. But again,
that's going to be a bridgehead to bridgehead, right?
Yes, that would be bridgehead to bridgehead. So this is a screenshot from 2008 box, but basically you can see here's a site link between two sites, Texas and Canberra. This example here from the blog post I referenced before, we probably want to check the connectivity, or at least at the time, because Canberra in Australia is pretty far away. But if you say, yeah, you know what, the internet in Australia is slow, but it's not that slow, and we don't have that many changes, and that's very free, probably go ahead and enable change notifications. When you go down to the site link, there's going to be an options attribute, as you can see out on the right. You need to set, this is a binary flag, so you need to set it to, if it's not set, you just set it to a value of 1, but otherwise you flip bit 1, and then it's going to show use as the notifier. All right. When Mike published that I was going to be here talking about RepAdmin, I think Ashley McGlone commented and said, right, oh, you're going to talk about RepAdmin. That's sort of old school. Don't you use PowerShell? And I was like, well, tongue in cheek, we're not actually going to talk about RepAdmin. But for the sake of completeness, he shared this super useful spreadsheet or cheat sheet, including sort of mappings between old school sort of CLI tools on Windows Server and their corresponding commandlets in newer versions of Windows. So here you can see, for example, I was talking about before RepAdmin/show obj meta for like getting metadata, right? You can see that corresponds to the command that I was talking about, get AD replication attribute metadata. And there's a bunch more of these. One that, like, I'd seen the commandlet name, but I'd never made the connection, and I just realized it when he posted this, is that RepAdmin REPL single object, so you can replicate a single object rather than all the changes that have occurred between two domain controllers, is actually supported by the sync AD object commandlet, which is surprisingly super cool. All right.
The thing that sucks about those PowerShell commandlets, they have so goddamn long to type. Yeah, RepAdmin show REPL,
that is,
you know?
That is true. Yeah, and you definitely don't want to, get-80 and then start tapping, because like, you would have been done with RepAdmin far before you get there. Okay. So now that we sort of have the basics of Active Directory replication covered, or at least sort of a little refresher if you knew already, I'm going to jump into this horror story that I promised. So I'm going to call this the 80 recycle bin disaster. Does anyone know what the 80 or the Active Directory recycle bin feature is? Yeah? Right? Mm-hmm. So, no? Okay, so the Active Directory recycle bin is it's a forest-wide feature that was introduced in 2008 R2. And you need to update your forest functional level and all of your domain functional levels to 2008 R2 before you can take advantage of this. And I'm not going to go into much detail about it, but basically the idea is that prior to 2008 R2, if you delete an object, it gets tombstoned, as it was called, and all data about it is stripped, right? So like it's lost, right? You need to do like an actual restore on a DC, authoritatively restore that object if you want the data back, right? But the idea behind the 80 recycle bin is that you sort of get a grace period in which you can decide to sort of reanimate a deleted object back to its sort of full state, right, or most of it at least. And so this would be super useful, like you delete something and all of a sudden you realize, oh no, we are not actually ready to decommission whatever application was relying on that until next week. So it would be nice to sort of have a recycle bin like you have in your desktop, right? You can go in and say like, please restore. So I was working with Active Directory for big corporations, right? And one of them had a pretty small, simple Active Directory setup, and one of the features they really sort of wanted in the near future was the Active Directory recycle bin. And it should have been pretty straightforward to do this, but because of a number of factors, including sort of ignorance towards how Active Directory replication works, this ended up in an absolute disaster. On the left-hand side, you can see the expectation of what would have happened, right? Like we install this 80 recycle bin, and we can, get our magic unicorn object back, like. The reality of it was more like this. This was the bin we were left with. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Right. So it was a normal day at work. Right? I was sitting at my desk, minding my own business, having some breakfast, and I was working at this big company that did IT outsourcing, and I was working in their ops department, right? So I was sort of third level sysadmin for a large array of enterprise customers, and everyone else was at lunch. It was sort of just me and two other guys, and then a project manager who doesn't have anything to do with the ops department, he comes down to our floor, and it was sort of weird. And he had this terrible expression on his face, a little bit like this guy. So he sort of looks around, a little seeking, and he's like, does anyone here know anything about Active Directory? And he's sort of nervous, and like, we need some help upstairs. And I was like, okay, I know a little bit about Active Directory. I think I've been in the job for like, this is my first system gig, and I've been in it for like a year maybe. I was not super comfortable with Active Directory, but sure. So I go upstairs, and I sort of ask, what's the problem, right? And so what they've had reported sort of via a number of links is that all the computers joined to this domain, and I think the end customer was sort of like a retail customer with like many outlets like spread like through multiple countries, right? And for their POS system, they had a bunch of Windows XP and Windows 7 and Windows Vista machines connected to this domain, right? So people would log in with their Active Directory credentials, start up the POS system, and then they would do their sales from there. And what they started seeing sort of like around lunch, an hour earlier, is that a bunch of people working these POS systems, all of a sudden, like they would lock the machine, and then all of a sudden they couldn't log in anymore. And it was almost like Active Directory didn't recognize their users or something. They also started getting like other weird, spurious things like subsystems in the machine, like failing in weird ways. And we were sort of just the sysadmins, right? Like we didn't have hands-on support. We didn't own their help desk or anything, and our customer was not even the user of the POS systems, right? So there's a lot of sort of like supply chain complexity in between. And so what had happened was that the first line help desk at another company had seen all of these errors. They were starting getting these report, and as any good, sort of like help desk, they had, just reboot the machine. It's probably going to be fine, right? But what had happened is that it didn't seem to solve any problems, and actually this started resulting in widespread sort of occurrences of this. That the machine come online again, and before you can even attempt to log into the domain, it says the trust relationship between this workstation and the primary domain failed. Okay, that's not a good thing, right? Because if the computer and the domain controller can't figure out how to talk together, then you're sure as hell not going to get any users logged onto your systems, right? So at some point they realized that this is pretty bad, right? And they started seeing a pattern every time someone was asked to reboot like this happened. So they sort of stopped and said like, nobody touch any computers. And so that's when they escalated to us. And the guy who picked it up he was not an ops guy, but he was the last person to work on a project connected to this setup. And so we get a hold of this of the company, and we asked like, how many desktops are joined to this domain? And they said 8,000 to 9,000. POS endpoints. And when you sort of browse with Active Directory users and computers or DS query or something like that, we're only seeing like 3,000 computer objects. This is sort of weird, right? Like that's a pretty significant discrepancy, right? And it sort of makes sense that like you see sort of this, right? If 5,000 machines just disappear, right? And so we look a little more, and we start seeing in the DC system event log, the account for the computer was not found in the SAM database. We start searching for, as I said, computer objects by name and user friend computer. We call and say, like, give us the host name of this machine, right? We want to like take a look at one of these samples. And the search returns no results. So we changed the domain controller to, there was only two DCs in this setup, so I changed the other domain controller, and all of a sudden, some of these host names return results, right? So on one domain controller, most of it is gone. On the other domain controller, some of it is gone. This is not the sort of consistency I was expecting based on what we just discussed, right? So we asked the guy who had been working on this setup, did you delete anything? Nope. Are you sure? I didn't do anything. Right? Whenever anyone says, I didn't do anything, they think that they've been cornered and you're not going to get anything out of them, but something has definitely happened. I didn't do anything. Okay. So someone had the idea to fire up LDP. And so we tried to see if we can discover any of these deleted objects to sort of validate this theory that someone might have accidentally, or some process or a piece of software have accidentally deleted all of these computer objects. And sure enough, the domain contains roughly 5,000 deleted computer objects. So weird. If we sort of put those two numbers together, there's still a bit of a discrepancy, but it sort of seems to work out, more or less. So we go back to the guy. Like, you didn't delete anything. Nope, didn't do anything. Okay. So at this point, the project manager is like screaming at everyone because he's afraid that we're going to have to like pay a big fine to these people for what's going on. The engineering manager starts yelling at this guy who claims he hasn't done anything, right? And the COO comes in and yells at all of us for not really finding a resolution to this, right? So it's not a very nice environment to be. So me and another guy who were like helping out looking at this, we sort of just take on our headphones and see like, okay, what else can we find out? So we dig into it, and remember this command up here, get AD replication attribute metadata, right? So RepAdmin can do that too, right? Like this is one-to-one mapping with the show obg meta command. And so what we do is we run RepAdmin's show obg meta, target DC01, the domain controller where most of the objects seems to have been deleted from. And then we don't actually put in the DN because in pre-2008 R2 Active Directory, when a computer is deleted, it's renamed to like its object grid and then like put in a deleted object container. So we figure out like a DN of one of these, we throw it into RepAdmin, and we see something really strange. Is deleted this property that controls whether an object in like the old versions of Active Directory has been tombstoned or not? We use the metadata to see like when it was updated. Like we know that it's been updated, right? We know that if deleted has been set, otherwise these wouldn't be treated as deleted objects, but we don't know when. And sure enough, it was last changed like a month ago.
It was using cache.
maybe we can't really, like, none of us can really, like, explain what's going on here at this point. Like, the only thing we knew is that before launch, those machines were definitely not deleted, right? Because, like, everything worked just fine. But now, apparently, their deletion has, traveled from the past and somehow, retroactively applied itself, right? So what gives? All right. So back to the guy again. Sure, you did not delete it. No, did not do anything. It's like, okay, let's try this a different way. Like, walk us through what happened before lunch. This is a non-accusatory version of trying to get some more details out of this guy. And he's like, well, I was demoting DCO2 in the test environment. He's like, the test environment? It's what? This is the production environment. It failed because it could not contact DCO1. Okay. But DCO1, at least the one in the test environment, was replaced weeks ago. So what do you mean replaced? Like, yeah, we stood up another domain controller and then we removed the DCO1. So, well, production had a DCO1, so I requested a firewall opening. So he requests one of our network admins to open up for TCP 389 across these two environments. And so, yeah, I added the DCFQDN to the host file, right, the IP address, and I demoted it again, and it didn't work, right? Like, he noticed that it took a little longer than usual, right? Like, it was spinning for a bit, but yeah, sure, it worked, right? And he was able to demote the machine, and he could decommission and then get on with his day. So
he did the DCO1 in production rather than in test?
We'll see exactly.
Exactly. The 80 admins in this room go, oh, because they know exactly what happened.
Danger, Will Robinson, danger.
Right. So in order to understand sort of why this could even happen, let's have a look at the environment we were actually hosting for them, right? So the production environment, as I said, was super simple. It consisted of 2 domain controllers, both running Windows Server 2008. The schema version is 2008 vanilla. The DFL and FFL all 2008, right? I think at this point we'd split them into two separate sites because they were using sites for load balancing of whatever, but otherwise super simple, right? So at some point, the customer requests a schema prep for an upgrade to 2008 R2, right? And so I'm just going to note like the imagined forest distinguished name or domain distinguished name there. So at this point, we upgrade the schema to 2008 R2, but we still have no 2008 R2 boxes in there. Like, the domain controllers are still pre-R2. Okay. So at this point, someone has, the great idea to ask, well, we should probably test this. I think someone at the customer said this, right? And it was like, yeah, sure, okay. Like, depending on what you want to do, how many legacy applications you have, yeah, you might want to test this. Great idea. And so at the time, we were sort of trying to ramp up upselling virtualization services. So someone in sales and project management had the great idea to say, we're going to sell them a copy of their own environment by just cloning them as VMs. Now, if you've ever looked into virtualizing domain controllers, the very first thing Microsoft is going to tell you is, don't clone your domain controllers, right? And the reason you shouldn't clone your domain controllers has something to do with that invocation ID thing that we were talking about before. And so you might know that for VMs running, I think it's 2012 R2, if you have a generation 2 VM on Hyper-V, you can actually set something called VM generation, VM ID regeneration or something like that when you clone or re-import a machine. And what that's going to do is it's going to set something in the guest services plugin on the machine, and the machine is then going to pick that up when it reboots and say, ooh, I should probably regenerate all of my invocation IDs if I'm a domain controller. So we'll get back to why that's pretty important when you start cloning your domain controllers. So at this point, right, on the right-hand side, we have this network isolated environment that's a complete, like, byte-for-byte clone of the production environment. Okay, so the next thing they do is they decide to clean up a little bit because they don't need 9,000 accounts to test against in the reference environment, right? They only need a few thousand, and so what they do, they take some of their Windows 7 or Windows Vista test machines, virtualize them as well, so they can, retain their trust relationship in this test environment. So, okay, the only thing that's sort of been going on in this reference clone over here is that we've deleted around 5,000 to 6,000 objects. And so the next thing that happens as part of this test is we stand up and promote a third domain controller running 2008 R2. And this is extremely important. 2008 R2, is there a difference? I tell you, there's a difference, especially when it comes to Active Directory. Okay, so far so good. The upgrade succeeds. They're not seeing anything weird in their test reference environment, right? So next things next, remove one of the old 2008 domain controllers, because the entire test entails getting all domain controllers up to 2008 R2 so that they can raise the FFL and enable the Active Directory resettlement, right? And so for that, they need to get rid of all the 2008s. The guy who's working on the project, it's like split between two guys. One goes on vacation, the other doesn't. But sort of what we've been able to figure out is that he did not actually demote DC01, the cloned test version. He sort of just removed it from Active Directory without cleaning up.
Oh,
that's a really bad idea. Like,
that's environment.
Like it's fine not to demote, right? But like at least clean up all the server and DSA metadata in Active Directory if you remove a domain controller.
Yeah,
Please.
at least set it in TDS.
Okay. So what happens next?
Just bad decisions.
Right. So the next thing that happens is that the guy working on this project, right? He's been tasked with removing DCO2, right? So DCO2 needs to be demoted now, and so he starts demoting it, and he gets this error that it cannot contact DCO1, its replication partner, right? And so he requests his firewall hole so that he can talk to another DCO1. And DCO1, with both copies of DCO2 having the same invocation ID, cannot tell the difference between DCO2 and the virtualized copy of DCO2. And so it goes, oh, hey, DCO2, I recognize your invocation. That's a lot to delete. Yeah.
Brett got it.
Brett gets it, yeah. Oh, hey, DCO2. That's a lot of stuff to delete. Thanks, I'll get right on it. And so now, after this, there should have been another slide here, but basically after this has happened, right, DCO1 is in a state where it just deleted a shit ton of objects because DCO2 did it, except DCO2 didn't actually do it. A virtualized clone, right? Like this is like Star Wars all over, right? It's like a clone of DCO2 made DCO1 think that it was okay to diverge, right? And now the real DCO2 has no reason to replicate any of these changes, because why would DCO1 notify DCO2 of changes that originated from DCO2? Right? That does not make any sense. And this is exactly why we saw this pattern, that changes to domain controller DCO2 returned some results, right? Because some of these computer objects were in there. Okay, so what a disaster. This calls for disaster recovery, right? Technically, this was not a USN rollback. I don't know if you've heard that term. It was more like a USN roll forward or sideways, or like I tried to get someone to Microsoft to sort of commit to a description of what we had here, but like there was different. But the answer is the same as had this been a USN rollback disaster. NCDS is still authoritative restore, right? You take a known good state of the backup of your domain controller, preferably the PDC. You shut everything. You shut replication down between all the replication partners. You do full system state restore on the domain controller that you want to target. Then you run NCDS util authoritative restore, and then you run, I think, a restore subtree or restore database. In NCDS util in 2003 and earlier, you could do restore database, and it would just take all the replicas in the local active instance. And what it's going to do when it does this authoritative restore is it's going to bump the USN value on every single attribute in the entire database by 100,000 or 1 million or something like that. So that when you re-enable replication, even though these changes were made backwards in time, it looks to all the replication partners like 1 million changes has taken place, and you need to replicate all of these, right? And so this way you sort of propagate out all the changes that you just restored. So this is sort of a normal disaster recovery procedure in Active Directory. Nothing there. We did that, but we only did it for the default naming contexts, which sort of bit us a little bit. We had to go back and like do the same thing for the DNS partitions. But overall, yeah, it seemed to work, right? And so the authoritative restore succeeds. DCO2 replicates all this restored data. I should say at this point we've like completely shut off this reference test environment. Like no more of that, please. The up-to-date inspector values on both of them are in sync. We still have some weird entries on DCO2 in the up-to-date inspector table, but it doesn't matter, right? Like these invocation grids from like the added DC in the reference environment is never going to see that again. So this is just like stale data, right? And the client machines can log in again, right? Like this is sort of what we were trying to solve in the first place. So we all decided, okay, well done, we got this, right? So time passes by, a long time actually. I think almost a year passes to the point where I've moved to another city, I'm at another office, and then one day I get dragged into a meeting room by my new boss, and on a video call is the project manager that you might remember from before. And so he says, remember that incident? And I said, what incident? And he said, that epic incident. It's like, oh, what about it? And he's like, yeah, it turns out we need some help with that domain. And I was like, oh no. Oh no. Okay, so the environment in question that we restored and sort of recovered, right, has been working just fine for the last year. Like, okay. So what they've been trying to do is, in the meantime, they've done like a proper test setup without cloning any domain controllers. They've run through their test, they've verified that all the applications will work with forced functional level 2008 R2, and they're ready to move ahead with doing the same upgrade in production, right? And so they start doing this upgrade in production. So they do the exact same thing in production. They set up a new DCO3 on 2008 R2. They promote it to a domain controller. And then anything connecting to DCO3 sort of fails miserably. Again, sort of not necessarily the same thing, but like the same weird error messages that don't contextually make any sense that we sort of saw during the first incident. What? Okay, so try again. Like demote DCO3, reinstall, repromote. Result is the same. Anything connecting to DCO3 failed miserably. So they asked if I want to take a look at it, and we start digging around a little bit, knowing in the back of their heads like what we had to go through the first time. And it's sort of weird. After being promoted, only about 3,000 computer objects and a few users sort of seem to persist in the directory on DCO3. Everything still works in the old 2008 domain controllers. Like all the data is there, in computer connecting, can log in. Everything's fine, right? But on DCO3, once it does that initial replication, if you've ever done DC promo, right, you need to wait for the nearest replication partner so you can get in all the, like, build the database basically. And so like it's almost as if during that process, 2/3 of all the objects in the directory sort of vanish into a magical vacuum cleaner inside the DSA. Okay. And so they asked me to have a look at this because I've sort of become more intimately familiar with Active Directory in the first place, sort of spurred on by this incident. I was like, I need to know more about this, and I need to know more about what is this. So having sort of attained, if not an expert, then at least sort of a subject matter expertise for certain things in Active Directory, they asked me, can you maybe take a look at this? And I was like, yeah, okay. We have a look. It takes a while. There's a little bit of time pressure, but it's not like an incident, right? But after a couple of weeks, I sit down and say, you know what? I'm going to take a sample set of some of the objects that seem to work, right? The computer objects that are correctly replicated on the new DC, and then a sample set of the computer objects that seem to just vanish, right? That seem to just disappear. I'm going to dump out every single attribute that has a value on both sides, and then I'm just going to compare them one by one. And there's not really any difference, except this weird attribute called isRecycled. The system-only attribute is set to 1. Every single object that seems to vanish into thin air every time DCO3 tries to replicate them. So I start Googling and start looking around. What is isRecycled? Maybe it has something to do with that recycled bin feature. And so the answer to this is, I think this is probably the best way of showing it. This is from the blog of Swedish directory services MVP, Christopher Andersson. And basically, the way that this transition from an Active Directory at forest functional level 2008 and with 2008 domain controllers that do not support the recycle bin to a system that does support this intermediary state of an object, right, where it's deleted but not quite deleted. And so I think this graphic sort of shows that pretty nice. In blue, you have sort of the pre-Windows 2008 R2 boxes, right? This would be our 2008 boxes. They will update if deleted and last known parent when an object is deleted, right? The new functionality in Windows 2008 R2 and above is that it also updates this isRecycled attribute. And the isRecycled attribute all of a sudden takes on the responsibility of isDeleted. Once that is set to 1, at least the way that a 2008 R2 domain controller would interpret it, means that it's gone forever, right? It's tombstone. We can't reanimate it. And now isDeleted, which to an older domain controller means tombstoned, no longer means tombstoned. It means it's in the bin, and you can still recycle it, right? And so this is the reason that you need to get the forced functional level up before you can enable the Active Directory recycle bin, because otherwise you end up in a state where the meaning of these flags change, right, from 1 second to the other, but the older domain controllers, the 2008, the 2003, do not know what to do with the isRecycled, right? It doesn't make any sense to them. I mean, they can see it, it's in the schema, they can update it, whatever, or they can't update it, but like they can read it, but they don't attribute any meaning to it, right? There's nothing in the DSA that says like, ooh, isRecycled, I should treat this in a certain way. What happens instead is that when you introduce the first 2008 R2 domain controller and it starts replicating everything, it is going to take a look at every single tombstone that already exists, that is every single object with isDeleted set, and then it's going to set isRecycled as well. Because in this in-between state, they mean the exact same thing, this object is tombstoned. And so for both the newer and the older domain controllers to be able to recognize that this object is tombstoned and this object is deleted for good, you need to set both of them, right? So 2008 R2, replicate an isDeleted object will automatically set isRecycled if that has not been set already. So when they introduced the 2008 R2 domain controller in the virtualized reference environment, this new guy says, ooh, you got a bunch of tombstones, let me just update isRecycled, right? Okay, so far so good. But what then happens when DC1 replicates all the changes from DC02? Because the primary thing that we were seeing the effect of in the first incident is all the deletions that happened on DC02, most of the directory, which were then replicated on DC01. But something else happened. DC02 is not going to pick up these changes because, according to DC01, it was the originating writer of them. But there's another subset of updates being replicated via DC02, which are all of these updates to the isRecycled attribute on all these deleted objects from DC03. So the update to isRecycled is sort of transitively replicated back via the fake DC02 from the new DC03, ends up on DC01, and the next time DC02 has a look, it's like, ooh, there's a bunch of updates. And because the USN has now been pushed pretty high because of all these deletions and updates on DC01, says, ooh, there's a delta, let me check all of this. And so it gets a subset of the objects that were actually processed correctly and had said isRecycled. And all of a sudden it sets that on all the copies of its own objects because the schema supports isRecycled, even though it doesn't know what to do with it, right? It's just, oh, the data changed, I updated for it. Now, this is obviously not a problem yet, up until the point where we introduce a new 2008 R2 domain controller, right? Because up until now, there have been two, after we do the schema upgrade to 2008 R2, right? There are two supported states or two supported configurations that these two attribute values, isDeleted and isRecycled, can be on any object in Active Directory, right? One is that isDeleted is set, isRecycled is not set or set to a non-one value, right? On the left-hand side, you see how a 2008 or a 2003 box would interpret that. Okay, that's a tombstone, that's a deleted object. I'm just going to track that until the tombstone lifetime runs out. On the right-hand side, you see sort of the 2008 R2 and newer interpretation of the same situation. isDeleted is set and isRecycled is not. As soon as it sees that, it's going to update isRecycled just so that we can keep track of it at least until the AD recycled bin is enabled, because otherwise you end up in a situation where the AD recycle bin is enabled, and all of a sudden Active Directory thinks that there's a bunch of recyclable objects, but they've already have sort of like all of their data stripped, and that's no good anyways. The other supported state is that they're both set, right? Is deleted is set, and is recycled is set. This is the process that 2008 R2 goes through if the AD recycle bin is not enabled, and this still to 2008 means it's a tombstone, and to a 2008 R2 domain controller or newer, it means that the object is recycled. Recycled does not mean that it has been reanimated. It means that it's in the same state as a tombstone, right? It can no longer be reanimated. It's been, out through the garbage disposal. So this is all fine, right? But now we've inadvertently introduced an unsupported configuration in which a 2008 domain controller will see this is recycled, not pay any attention to it because it does not know what it is. It just checks that it's deleted, it's not set, and it's like, yeah, sure, that's a live object. That's your computer. That's your user account. Yeah, I'll totally let you in. But when the 2008 R2 box sees this, it only sees this recycled. Oh, I'm going to treat that as a deleted object. I'm not even going to bother, right? Like, this is a tombstone off to the infrastructure master. It does not update it's deleted because there's no code in the DSA that checks for this sort of thing, because if you were doing things correctly, no domain controller can actually update an object. Right? Like, there's no way a supported directory configuration would end up with an object in this state. So Microsoft does not take it into account because that does not make any sense, right? So now I'm in a situation where I have these weird objects. I don't know what to do with them. We can't move forward with the upgrade. They can't get their AD recycle bin. Maybe the AD recycle bin would have helped us, and we could like go back, and like we're sort of stuck in this twilight zone in between. Right? So this is now me. This is not the project manager. I'm starting to get pretty nervous as well, right? And so we had a premium support contract with Microsoft, and so I call up, hello, Microsoft, help, fix, please. And there's a bunch of emails and a bunch of calls back and forth. They have a look at the environment. It takes a couple of weeks. And finally, they get back, and I'll never remember what they said in that closing call. You seem to have left your directory in an unsupported state. We can't help you. And then that call was over.
You've left your directory in an unsupported state.
Okay. I didn't know whether to be, like, proud, like... We had done what we had done before, right? Like with this directory data, and Microsoft was like, nope, can't do. Okay, so the only possible solution, according to Microsoft Premier Support, was we're just going to have to delete, like properly delete all the objects that are affected by this issue, recreate them again. Again, since the majority of objects affected by this, we could re-roll out all the users, and like they had some password management and user management. So like we sort of do that. The big problem was that we needed to unjoin, delete, and rejoin all the domain members, right? All of these Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows XP machines. And again, more than 3,000 machines were affected. They're spread over like 500 physical locations in, not the smallest European country. There was limited on-site tech support, right? There's not like a help desk guy in every single store. The desktop management software that they're using couldn't really be automated for this task, right? There's nothing built in to sort of like join and rejoin. And the biggest problem with this when we started like running these tests was that it was super time consuming, because if you've ever gone in to like rename my computer and do like unjoin the domain, the first thing it's going to pop up with is a modal that says like, you will need to reboot your machine for this to take effect. Would you like to reboot your machine? You need to reboot, wait for the machine to come up. Now you need to find the password for a local admin account on that machine because it's no longer joined to the domain. You need to log in, and you need to join it back in with some credentials that has access to your computer objects and Active Directory. This is super cumbersome even for a single machine, and we need to reboot it, by the way, again. So this is going to be extremely time consuming if we're going to do this in 5,000 physical or 500 physical locations for like a number of machines at a time. So I was looking at this, and like, there must be some way of doing this programmatically. And sure enough, there is a way of doing this programmatically. The Win32 computer system class, which I suspect this is what the rename computer prompt actually calls in the background, exposes two methods, one called join domain or workgroup and one called unjoin domain or workgroup. The nice thing is that this modal that says you need to reboot your machine in order for this to take effect is not hinged on WMI. This is something that the Windows Shell UI has built in this control, right? And so I started testing this, and it turns out that you can unjoin a machine, join it again with a new name, for example, reboot the machine in one go, and it actually works. So we tested this a couple of times with the Windows XP 7, and it seemed to sort of work. So the solution we ended up coming up with, and this was sort of like my baptism by fire using PowerShell at scale. I've been doing a couple of scripts with like nothing like this before, right? So the solution we ended up with was we create a new domain user to join, create, delete new computer objects in the computers OU. We use group policy in the existing machines to push out a new local admin user. We stopped advertising LDAP and KRB service records in DNS for DCO2, and I'll get to why that is in a second. So at this point, the clients, if they run for like a day or two, they will always end up hitting DCO1 because when they do DNS-based service discovery, DCO1 is the only one that has the services available, right? So after a couple of days, after making this change, with PowerShell, I wrote like a long script that per machine would test the connections to the client, test that we could log in with the local admin just to make sure that we sort of have foothold on the machine, right? Then we do a remote call to unjoin the domain or work group. Now the big problem comes because, and this is sort of why I stopped advertising the LDAP and KRB SRV records, because I wanted to make sure that they hit a specific domain controller so that I could how do you call that? So that I could predict which other domain controller needed to replicate this deletion, right? Needed to replicate this change. And so, again, RepAdmin exe, rebel single objects, target source, and then the last value down here, normally you would put a distinguished name, right? You'd put like the distinguished name of the object that you want to replicate. But given that the replication interval may have lapsed in between me calling unjoin and then going back to replicate the deletion, I don't actually know the address. I don't know the distinguished name of the computer object, or I can't guarantee it at least at the time of deletion, right? So instead of throwing a bunch of errors, it turns out that when you need a distinguished name, you can actually use a number of values. You can use the object grid of an object to address a distinguished object in the directory, just as if you had been using the DN. You can also, for security principles, use the security identifier. So if down here you do angle brackets SID and then like the actual security identifier string, that's going to address whatever principle actually has that security identifier. So this is super useful if you're doing like resolution of users based on a security identifier, right? Like you're enumerating, let's say, like an ACL on an object on a domain member machine, and for some reason, like the SID API is not working. It's like, well, you can just look up in Active Directory, like which object does this SID actually correspond to. So I use this trick with the object grid, like I could fetch that beforehand, to say like, please replicate the deletion of this object regardless of whether it's already happened or not. Once I've done that, the same account name is no longer in use, and we can rejoin the machine with the same name. This is sort of another complicating factor because their desktop management software would like blow up and the POS system would stop working for some reason they relied on the host name, right? So once that's confirmed, we again remotely call join domain or work group. The call itself is authenticated with the local admin user that we used before, and then you pass the credentials for the non-domain admin domain user that we created in the first step to recreate all of these machines. And then finally, the script does, shut down -m computer name, whatever, or a similar call to WMI, I can't remember. So the real solution ended up being sort of 250, 300 lines of very ugly PowerShell. Again, this is 8 years ago. I'm pretty sure I'd be appalled if I ever saw that again. But yeah, 250, 300 lines of ugly PowerShell. We ended up with a success rate of around 90%. So I ended up doing this in batches, right? Like I'd go to the customer and say, like, please give me the closing times for these stores, and then we'll do it after hours and sort of figure this out. So yeah, I managed to do this for almost 3,000 computer accounts with this WMI-driven PowerShell horror script, and ended up actually completing like from when we decided on this solution to actually executing it, less than 50 hours. Again, this is just myself, right? But less than 50 hours, all from the comfort of the office, rather than having to go to another country and do all of this.
This was all mainly computers?
Yeah. So again, we sort of found a solution for what we were going to do with the user accounts, rather than like someone else took care of that. And so like what I was focusing on was the other half, which was the computer accounts. Yeah. And
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How did you stop advertising the LDAP service records, SRV records?
Right. So there's a group policy setting. I can't remember. I'll gladly like post it on Twitter or add it in the slide deck. But there's a group policy setting, and I'm a little rusty on how this works. But like there's a group policy setting that allows you to exclude certain services from being advertised in DNS. And I can't remember if it's dependent on you actually changing something in the registry on the domain controller that you want to no longer have advertised the service records. But it's some combination of the two, and I'll gladly look it up and post it. But yeah, this is like a supported feature in Active Directory. You can take a single domain controller, and it doesn't have to be everything, right? You can say like, you know what, this guy over here is only for authentication purposes. He's not going to advertise LDAP, for example.
Okay, yeah, I've done that before with the registry, where you can change the weight and the priority of LDAP records for a domain controller, but I didn't think you could just stop advertising completely.
Right, so there is a related, either registry, well, the GPO probably does that as well, but yeah, there is a related registry setting where you can basically say, like, I'm not going to advertise these services at all from that specific DC. But yeah, I'll gladly dig it out and share afterwards.
I'm assuming you wanted to get rid of them completely, because if you do the weight and the priority, you could still have a chance of getting the DCO2.
That is true.
That is true. DCO1.
That is true. I think in an environment like this, right? Again, like this is not 1999, right? Like there's full like duplex broadband with connectivity between all of these sites, and it probably wouldn't have been a problem, right? I probably could have done something similar, weight them super high, and then yeah, just wait a day or two. Yeah.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
See, it sounds like the problem entries were all in the same state. They had is deleted 0 and is recycled 1.
Correct. Yeah.
So why couldn't you use something like LDIFT to just set is recycled to 0?
It's a great question, and this is the first thing I asked Microsoft. You know, they said, you know, we're not going to touch this with a 5-foot pole. And I said, well, maybe we can do it ourselves. Like, is there a way we can just update these values? And they looked at it and they said, no, because by design, is recycled and is deleted. If you go in and look at the attribute schema entries in your schema partition, you're going to see that they have the system-only flag set. And when the system-only flag is set for an attribute, that means that only the DSA can write to that attribute. So there's no, you know, I could have provided an LDIF and uploaded that and said, like, do these changes, but they would have been rejected. Like, again, it's unsupported flipping these, which is also why Microsoft never expected this to happen in the first place.
Right.
So great question, but yeah, no, that wasn't possible.
And you couldn't modify the ACL on the attribute?
No, because the system-only flag in the system-only attribute schema is also system-only, right? Like, this is sort of like a... like this is a system support sort of a lock mechanism. Oh, right? Yeah. So you know, I tried to exhaust all of these possibilities, but this is impossible by design, because it should be impossible to attain that state in the first place. Right? Yeah.
Man, you did a good job.
I like it. For me personally, this really sort of like ignited like the power of PowerShell, not just for like, you know, cool stuff, like you can sort of like start interfacing with the computer programmatically in interesting ways, but sort of the economy of doing this at scale was all of a sudden way more interesting, right? Because at the time we had very few customers who had, you know, 100 or 1,000 or more sort of similar systems where it made sense to sort of do things in parallel. But we had customers that had, you know, 30 application servers, and there were plenty of sort of like maintenance documentation. There was like, RDP into server 1, now repeat for 2 through 29. And like this is a huge sort of waste of time, energy, money, whatever, right? And so this also sort of opened my eyes to doing things like, I think we were doing large-scale sort of web server management with IIS. And they have a new certificate provider. We need to like prep it with like a new root CA or something like that. It's like, there's no way I'm going to log on to, you know, 30 servers cert manager.msc. Oh no, that doesn't work. I need it for the computer account. Like so many clicks, right? And now I've only done it for one machine, and I've already wasted 10 minutes, right? Now I have to do 29 more times. Or you figure out that there's a .NET API that wraps access to the certificate store with which you can push public key certificates. And so you just you do that in a script, right? And then you just need to feed it an input file with 30 host names, and congratulations, right? So the experience from this sort of really opened my eyes to this, and sort of also kind of propelled my own interest in using PowerShell scale. Absolutely. Yeah.
You said the issue came back after what, a year?
The issue popped up again after a year, because after a year they finally got to a place where they were comfortable upgrading to 2008 or 2.
Right. Okay. Because the tombstone by default, what's 180 days? But if the attribute doesn't exist in 2008, because
that's right.
recycled's only in R2, I was wondering how on the pre-R2 state it ended up in a year and not 180 days.
So the deleted object lifetime and the tombstone lifetime, the two flags that they use are not the same. But this may also be like this is like 8-9 years ago, so it might also be me over exaggerating my own memory. So, very good point. Very good point, Brett. It might have been just a couple of months, right? But I remember sort of emotionally having distanced myself from the issue enough to sort of not think too much about it.
Sure, that was only about 3 days.
Yeah. It might have been. But the experience was so traumatic, right? Very well.
That's an amazing story, which I hope I never have to live.
Yeah. No, again, this is sort of a tale of woe, right? Like this is. An example. What did you delete? I didn't delete anything. I swear I didn't delete anything. But what did you do? Yeah. Oh, well, I was over here in this environment. Yeah. All right, well, tell me more about that over there. Well, I took the screwdriver, put it into the electrical panel, and right.
The AD recycle bin. The AD recycle bin is so handy, though. It saved me a few times when I've accidentally deleted computer accounts.
I think the customer eventually became very happy with the Active Directory recycle bin, but the road to get there was a little more windy than expected. Yeah.
Well,
was there less ranting and waving of arms by the chief executive officer and everybody else, or did they realize, well, we got out of this once and it was worse then?
No, not really. I think sort of like the first incident, right, like the original incident, when we sort of resolved or thought we had resolved that, right, we had been working on this for like 10 hours straight, and it was like well past midnight, and people were sort of like having a beer in the COO's office, and I was like, ugh. And then when all of this hit me, right, and I had this epiphany, it's like, oh, this is the recycle bin haunting us, right? I felt really good about myself, and I like tried to tell some of my colleagues, like, we did something, impossible with Active Directory. Isn't this cool? Like nobody really seemed to care. I seem to be the only one really invested in this issue. And so by the end of resolving it, right, like where we are right here, it was just me in the office, right, like at 11 on a Tuesday. And so like sit there, I could have opened a bottle of champagne for myself, but it felt sort of a bit flat compared to the original thing. But I like the customer itself, right? Like the client who ultimately sold this onto another company, they were pretty impressed and pretty happy with this outcome, especially given that we had relayed to them that Microsoft had said, nope, rebuild your environment, and this was sort of what they had in mind, right? They thought that they either had to rebuild their entire environment from scratch, or go through this process of like figuring out how to hire someone to go out and like reboot 3,000 machines all over like a huge geographical area, right? So with that in mind, us coming back and saying like, there's a chance this might work, and then I think we executed this over a couple of weeks, and then coming back and saying like, yeah, we actually worked it out. I think they were pretty happy and pretty impressed with that.
Did they go and implement a forest recovery plan after that?
A number of procedural changes were implemented after both of these occurrences. One thing is, I think, like the day after the original incident, there was an updated policy on customers that wanted to clone virtualized domain controllers that said no. And not like if they pay a lot of money, it just said no, right? Never again.
I know that feeling that you're saying though about like solving a problem when there's nobody around, and you're like, I did it.
Yeah.
And there's nobody around. I've like written like simple scripts in a way like I'm stuck on some syntax, and I'll have the headphones on, and I'll get up and I'll be like, yeah.
Yeah.
And people looking at me, they're like, what happened? And I'll try to explain it, and it's just deer in the headlights.
Yeah. No, so like again, sort of like back to the baby I was showing before, right? Like I sort of had that like profound, moment of first having figured it out, right? Like having realized something new that I didn't think possible, and then again after actually having solved it, after actually having run the last batch of the script and fixing these machines, it's like we really did it. Microsoft said it couldn't be done, and we did it, right?
Did you share what you did with Microsoft? And say, tell me it can't be done.
We did. We actually, not directly through our support contract, but we ended up contacting our technical account manager at the time and saying like, okay, we know that you don't want to solve this. We know that you don't want to commit, for whatever support liability reasons you have. You don't want to commit to this being wrong or right. I just need someone who go through this plan, have a look at like the script or what we were trying to do, and then just say like, yeah, this is a terrible idea, or not say anything, right? Like you don't have to commit to saying like, yeah, this is Microsoft's supported solution. I just want you to like tell me if this is a really bad idea. And they basically came back and said like, and so like that was what we got from Microsoft, and we fed it back to the stand that we actually ended up sort of succeeding with this cowboyish plan of fixing it, and they're like, oh, cool. But again, they're not super invested in it because this is not really something
supposed to be able to get into that state.
It's not supposed to be getting into that state, right? And like the support procedure would be the same. Would this happen next week to another even bigger client, right? It's like, yeah, no, too bad. You need to get yourself out of this because we can't, right? So yeah, it was not that they were like rejecting or being mean about it or anything. It was just not part of their support.
That's what you're looking at, though. Microsoft saying, yeah, we're not going to help you. You might have to recreate everything brand new.
Oh yeah, for sure, right? Like I'm not going to speculate on like sort of the incentives there, but yeah, sure. They might be interested in seeing that happen instead, right? Yeah. But I mean, there's actually also another reason from sort of like a Microsoft support standpoint, and that is that, okay, if you manage to sort of like go against our advice to the extent where you fucked up this bad, right? Like this is like, we've never seen anything like this. There might be dragons elsewhere, right? Like I think Microsoft were like, this is the first time or the second time we've ever seen, I think they said this, like this has never happened before, right? Like this is the first time we've seen this. We're not going to invest in trying to reproduce and mitigate this because again, like you sort of shot yourself in the feet, right? And so again, then there's not really any incentive to say it's like, oh, if you just figure out yourself how to sort of maybe sort out this unsupported state that you've ended up in, we'll support you in the future, right? So again, they also have a bit more of an incentive to say, no, start over and then we'll support you fully, right?
Is your store done here?
My store, I don't think, yeah, that was the last slide.
Except you're going to call sometime, just before January, where they're trying to go to 2012 or 2016. Right?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm going to stop it now.
You know, cert LM.ms.